Welcome to the Why Did I Get Cancer podcast. I'm Deborah Herlax-Enos, a small-town girl turned TV nutritionist and healthy living expert. I design health programs for the average guy or gal, including those average guys named Metallica. On September 1st, 2020, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I asked every oncologist the same question, why did I get cancer? But none of my doctors had good answers for me. I wanted answers, and that's why I started this podcast. I want to help you to lower your cancer risk and provide self-care tips for those in the battle. I'm getting answers, and I want to share them with you. Okay, if you've been around for any length of time, you know I'm not a fan of EMFs, electromagnetic fields, or frequencies, but I'm a fan of my cell phone. Yes, I use my cell phone way too much. I'm on my iPad way too much. So here's what I'm doing is I'm learning to manage technology because I want to be a really healthy person. I don't want to be around excess radiation. And this is why I'm a big fan of WaveBlock. And one of the things I love about WaveBlock is they're educators. They're educating people on how to take protective measures to still use technology, but just protect their bodies and their children. I didn't realize this. I was on a WaveBlock phone call the other day, and they were telling me that children or kids, the small ones, their skulls absorb 10 times the radiation that an adult fully formed skull will absorb. And that in other countries, like European countries, and I can't remember all of them, but they actually ban Wi-Fi in nurseries and kindergartens. So what a great idea, because the kids' skulls are just not fully formed yet. Okay, so here is what I do to protect myself. First of all, I turn my Wi-Fi router off at night. If you go to the WaveBlock website, which is waveblock.com, they have a whole educational section, and the top EMF emitting devices, cell phones, earbuds, or things like that, and Wi-Fi routers. So I'm trying to manage those. One of the ways I manage the radiation on my listening device is I use the WaveBlock tape that goes around the device. It doesn't impact me hearing at all. And what it does, according to the research by WaveBlock, it knocks radiation down by 90+%. So if you have a listening device on each ear, where do you think that modem is meeting? The modem is your head. So you want to knock down radiation as much as you possibly can. So go check out WaveBlock. Again, I really encourage you to read some of their education. And if you use the code ENOS10, you'll get 10% off of your purchase. And do your own due diligence, but it's a fascinating topic. Educate yourself, protect your kids, enjoy. You could look at my podcast guest today, Jenn Bricker-Bauer, and say, wow, she must have had a life of such hardship. She was born without legs and put up for adoption. And I have to tell you, she told me such an inspiring story because her parents never allowed her to say, I can't do something. She went on to be a state champion in gymnastics, competing against able-bodied competitors. She's a world-renowned aerialist and a published author. Jenn's attitude is just a can-do attitude. Nothing is holding her back. And I have to tell you what was also so interesting is her childhood idol was Dominic Moceanu, who is an Olympic medalist, and it turns out they're actually siblings. So you've got to listen to today's podcast to hear more about Jenn's inspiring story.
I think walking by faith and not by sight has really helped me get through my entire life. And my parents believe that too. I mean, they said, you were born like this for a reason, on purpose, for a purpose, not by mistake. And I know for a fact that being born without legs was absolutely not a mistake. Totally on purpose. 100% for a purpose. And in no way a mistake.
Okay, today's guest on Why Did I Get Cancer is somebody I met in the green room at NBC in Seattle. Her name is Jenn Bricker-Bauer, although she was Jenn Bricker back then. Now she's married with a little baby. And Jenn, you gave me your book, Everything is Possible. And honestly, with you, everything is possible. You're a world famous aerialist. Am I saying that correctly?
Yep,
You have,
aerialist, yep.
aerialist, you have traveled the world. You were a competitive gymnast. And tell us a little bit about your story, how you became all of those things with what most of us would look at with your body as something that could really limit you.
Yeah, so, well, thank you for having me. And it's just cool to connect after all this time of meeting up. It's just
Yes,
so full circle. I just love that. I love how God kind of does those
me
things. And
too.
I love those moments when they happen. That's just such a cool thing. I love it. Yeah, so basically, so I was born without legs and left in the hospital, put up for adoption, and was in a foster home for about 3 months, the first 3 months of my life. Then I was adopted and ended up in a small town in southern Illinois, basically middle of nowhere. And I had three older brothers, and my parents just, they were not like sophisticated in things of adoption or people without legs or anything like that. It was all new to them, and
Mm-hmm.
they had never experienced any of that. But they just raised me, you know, normal. I mean, in that way, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they would make jokes because they're funny. They're like, you're not normal, you're not normal. But yeah, in the way of like they didn't treat me differently because I was adopted or because I was didn't have legs.
Yeah.
And it was just really a God thing. God chose them to be my family.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So they they didn't look at you as that you had any limits.
No,
Yeah.
no, just I know it was kind of like this common sense thing for them. They're just like, why would we treat you any differently?
Oh,
You can do what you want. I mean, it was so simple in there. I love that.
I
The
love
simplicity.
that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Wow, how the world could be different if we just looked at it as what we look at as a very complicated existence, as just looking at it as a little more simple of just let's look at people with a different lens and just believe that we're all capable of anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's nice. I like the simplicity in their minds in
Yeah.
those topics.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I do too. And moving on with your life, and going through school, you played sports.
Hmm.
Tell us a little bit about your athletic career.
Yeah. So I just loved sport. I was just a natural athlete. That's the best way I can explain it.
Hmm.
I always liked to be physical. I liked to climb trees. When I was little, I liked to be outside. I liked to bounce on the trampoline. And so I guess I like to be very active. From as early as I can remember.
Yeah.
And I loved a lot of different sports. So I tried. I played softball for 3 years. I really liked that. I played basketball. That was my least favorite, but I tried it, played
Yeah.
it. That was okay, but it just wasn't my thing. Played volleyball. Really loved volleyball.
Wow.
That was
Okay.
that was like, and I'm good at volleyball too. So
Yeah.
that. Obviously, it's nice when you're good at it.
Right.
And then my favorite was so I watched gymnastics on TV, and that was like my favorite. But then I grew up in, like I said, in this very small town, so
Hmm.
we didn't really have like full blown gymnastics, but we had power tumbling, and
Oh,
power tumbling was huge in the Midwest. Like it
I
just,
remember power tumbling. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it was really. Actually, it's in the Olympics now, and
Oh
so it's
gosh.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
tumbling and trampoline are now in the Olympics.
Hmm.
So, but not when I was starting. So, but I ended up started to compete in that. Competed for 4 years, and
Hmm.
I was the first person, with no legs, of course, to ever compete with able-bodied athletes or
Right.
ever in power tumbling. That's for sure.
Wow.
And I, did I got state champion one year and went to Junior Olympics and just kind of went all over and had an amazing coach and coaches and just, there people didn't limit me in that way and they had never done it, but they tried and they let
Hmm.
me try.
Wow. I love that you just said people didn't limit you
Hmm.
because it's not just people that limit us, it's ourselves that limit us.
Oh
So
yeah.
we wake up in the morning and we're tired, we're grumpy, we're fill in the blank. How do
Mm-hmm.
you, how do you smash the limitations in your head?
Mm. I think that's, for me personally, that's so much harder than physical limitations.
Yeah, I'll bet it is.
So much harder for
Yeah.
me, There's just a lot, in your mind it's just such a different thing. Something physical, you can just see it and just do it.
Right.
And that I'm also that person, so different people, different challenges and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's just my faith. I mean, there's no way that I could battle these things in my mind without my faith in Jesus, without being in the Word. So it kind of is a combination, like reading in the Bible
Mm-hmm.
consistently, but it's not a formula, and praying. So it's like a mixture of reading and praying and having a constant
Mm-hmm.
open line of communication, a relationship like you have with anybody else. You keep
Right.
it going, you talk, you keep up to date, you know what's going on in their lives and
Mm-hmm.
that kind of a thing. So that's like a very basic way to answer it, but within that there's so much. Like, it changes every day.
Hmm.
It's different. Sometimes I pray more, sometimes I read more, sometimes it's
Mm-hmm.
totally half and half, but it's not just the praying and the reading. It's because it's rooted in why he created me the way he did. It's rooted in the purpose that he has for me. And that's
Mm-hmm.
flowing and changing too,
Yeah.
with like, who am I speaking to today? Or where am I going to perform or speak? Or even just in the day to day stuff, not professionally speaking, not performing, but just in like, I'm going to the store and and you just talk to somebody and you meet somebody. I mean, I've had these things happen on a plane and in the most normal settings.
Hmm.
And then that is when, God opens the door, and that's directly right back, and you're like, I know that's what I was supposed to do. And for me, I love when I know I'm supposed to be there. I know that's what God has for me.
Yeah.
That's like the one thing I never want to miss is his will for me.
Ugh.
Like it's just like I don't want to miss that. I
Right.
want to always be on purpose.
Yeah. And when you're living a bigger life, because that's just a bigger life right there.
Mm,
You're not living for yourself. I
yeah.
can see how that would help you with limitations that, again, you might wake up and just think, it's so much harder to feed my new baby or, get in the car and go down to the store and buy groceries and cook dinner because you have some physical limitations that other people don't have. And it
Hmm.
would probably be really easy to let that color your day.
Yeah. I mean, it's having a baby was like just a whole. I mean, the pregnancy. It was the first, so everything was new, and
Yeah.
so being pregnant, I was fit, I was healthy, I didn't gain much weight,
Hmm.
everything I wanted basically in that way.
Yeah.
And then towards the end, when I got big, for no, everyone else thought I was tiny, but for me it was like huge. My body is so small,
Right.
and there was so much weight. So the last like month and a half got really heavy, and just pressure,
Mm.
on your lower abs, and so they just got uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and but then everybody I talked to, they're like, that was like that for me too. So I'm like, oh, I guess, because people think, well, was it worse because you didn't have legs? And I thought maybe the pressure I thought was, but
Yeah.
then the more and more I speak to people, they're like, no, that was all of us. I'm like, oh, okay, well,
Huh.
so that part was, I would say, I mean, a breeze. I had no weird cravings. I didn't have any of the stuff that people say you have when
Hmm.
you're pregnant. But I think that's because my nutrition I understand nutrition.
Hmm.
And so I think I just wasn't deficient in those things.
Right.
So that was nice. You know what I mean?
I
So
do.
I didn't
Yeah.
have those. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was nice. But then I had a natural home birth planned. I had a water birth
Oh.
planned, and that's what I wanted. For years, I just knew that's what I wanted
Hmm.
whenever I was going to have a baby. And it was in alignment with everything else that with holistically and health and all that stuff. And so everything that I wanted didn't happen. Like
Oh
literally, I
no,
mean,
really?
everything. Just oh yeah, yeah, everything. My water broke. It was broke for like ever, and I wasn't. The contractions were like coming and going, and just stop it. Just kind of, which okay, that's normal. That's normal for the first time. But
Hmm.
then as it like started and it was consistent and it was going, it was so extremely painful, which I was I wasn't expecting, because I can deal with pain in a normally fine,
Right.
but this was like a whole different situation. And it was starting to be like, I don't think this is right, you know?
Yeah.
And then I finally had, oh, and then it was the 1 week of the whole entire year that my midwife was on vacation.
Oh
That's when my water
no.
broke. So then I had
And were
backup
you
midwives.
early? Were
I
you
was
Oh,
early.
you were early
I was,
too.
yes,
Okay. Yeah.
I was a little over 2 weeks early.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So
Yeah.
that as well. So there was that as well. And which everyone says, oh, no, no, your first one, you're not going to be early. You're going to
Right.
go past. You're going to go late. I knew I wouldn't,
Yeah.
because I was like, there's nowhere else to go,
There's nowhere else to
go
go.
here.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
Because even
And
retaining water, like it'll settle, around the ankles or, and but you had to take that all on from the
yeah.
hips up. So I can see how uncomfortable that must have been.
Yeah, it got uncomfortable. I
Yeah.
mean, I worked out the whole time. I didn't
Wow.
stop working out or anything, but because that helped.
Hmm.
But so ended up, long story short, I ended up in the hospital, and he was breech, which was insane because he was checked the whole time.
Oh my
Didn't know it was
gosh.
breech. And the thing is, my midwife was trained to deliver breech babies. It's actually not, when you look into it, I didn't know that was possible. But then when you look into it, tons of people do natural breech births at
Oh,
home.
I did not know that.
And yes, yes. And my midwife, that was one of the first things I asked her when I interviewed her, is if she was trained in that, because
Hmm.
I didn't want an automatic C-section if he happened to be breech.
Right.
Well, that's what happened. That's what happened. I ended up having a C-section, the last thing I wanted, the very last thing
Oh
I wanted.
no.
And it was just like, man, I mean, everything went, and that was really, really, really tough to deal with. Like,
I'll
not
bet it was.
physically.
Yeah.
Physically, it wasn't even painful. Like, the recovery was fine.
Hmm.
But it was like, this is so, everything that went with it. It was like, this is not what I wanted, like, at
Right.
all.
Right.
At all. I planned forever for this. And I couldn't believe, I'm like, me? Like, of all people? I was like, I did everything right. The pregnancy was like, I mean, everything was so, healthy and fine. And it was so frustrating, just like devastating. It took me a while
Right,
to get
of
over that.
course, because
Yeah.
and I think a lot of us feel that way when we maybe get a diagnosis or we think, "Hey, I have worked my whole life to not have this happen." And
Yes.
so it
Yes.
almost feels like, okay, my body has just betrayed me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what do you do with that? So can you speak to that a
Yeah.
little bit about, you know, your expectation was X and Y happened. And how do you move on from that?
Yeah. It was, I mean, and then everything with that, it was like the unexpected hospital bills because we had a home birth plan and we paid for
Mhm.
that already. And then the recovery, not that it was painful, but every move that I did, I used my abs, my core.
Ugh,
So I had to be like, I was so careful because I didn't want to mess the surgery up.
right.
And thankfully it
Right.
wasn't painful, but I was so limited. I was like,
Mm,
so it was just, I mean, it was very, very mentally, like, extremely challenging.
yeah.
And it was just total, I mean, I had to just, it was a lot of praying and asking God, like, where did I go wrong? Did I get
Hmm.
something wrong? Did I make a mistake along the way in planning? Just, you know what I mean? Like, there was all
Yeah.
these, both from my husband and I, because we were like, what in the world? Like, it was just so out of left field,
Yeah.
so out of left field. And so I was frustrated for just a long time. It was just like confused, frustrated. But I know that I'm like, God, you always have a plan in something. So like, and he doesn't
Hmm.
always tell us what that is or show us why.
Hmm.
But I did see, even in the hospital, like the nurses were like, we were blown away. I mean, the maternity like section of the hospital, they were just amazing. I mean,
Mm.
we were like so taken care of, and they had like a specialist for everything, to teach you about breastfeeding, to teach you about the car seat, to teach you about. I mean,
Wow.
it was like, so that was amazing. I mean, especially first time parents, like
Hmm.
they just got to teach us. We learned so much. They had so many resources, and they were so sweet and so loving, and like, just, especially when I was like so emotional and all over the place, not all over the place, but to me I was all over the place.
Yeah.
But then like one of the nurses comes in on like the second or third day, and she was just like talking about, like, her and the other nurses were talking about me, on the side. And they'd probably never seen anybody who didn't have legs, especially someone coming in, in the pregnancy
Right.
department. And that's a side note. Like, people my whole life have asked, like, oh, can you get pregnant and this and that? And I always thought that is the funniest, weirdest, like, in my mind, kind of dumbest question, even though I'm not like, I don't judge people for asking, but it's like, I just don't have all of my legs. Like, has nothing to do at all with like having a baby.
Yeah.
But it's just so funny. Like, people have asked that my whole life, and I always thought, that is the strangest.
It's
like,
out of all the questions people could ask you.
Yeah. That's
right.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so the nurses come in, and one of them, she had been there. She was an older nurse, and then there was a bunch of younger nurses, and they all rotate. But one of them said something like, I don't know, like, oh, I don't know if they said they felt bad for me or they didn't know something. And she was like, please, like, she can probably do, what did she say, bench press or something, like more than all of us or something like that. She made some like funny comment. Well, and ended up, she had seen me on TV like several years ago. And she was like, it's gotta be her. So then she came in and asked me.
That's really
then
cool.
We started, talking about everything. And it ended up, she was like, you need to come back. She's like, more people, I guess, I thought I was like a disaster in the hospital,
Right.
And she was like, I can't believe how well you're handling everything. You've impressed us. Like, so my point is, God was doing something in the hospital and I didn't even realize.
Right.
Right. And blessing me as well through them.
Right.
So yeah, that was one aspect of it. But getting through it again was just believing and knowing that God has to have purpose in it. He always uses things and turns them around, even when they're not good things.
That's right.
I mean, even when they're bad things, that tragedies or whatever, He will always find a way to turn that into something good for His purpose.
Yeah. And that's not always easy to see while you're in it. Okay, I don't know what the weather's like where you are, but I am telling you, it is getting cold here in Washington. I feel like we're going to have an early winter, and I think it's actually happening. So I hope I didn't prophesy that. But anyway, as winter starts to happen, I transition from eating salads and raw foods to eating more savory, warm and savory and salty and all the things kinds of food, because I get cold in the winter like a lot of you, and eating warmer foods feels like it just fuels my energy and makes me feel better. So this is how I'm transitioning. Instead of salads, I'm now doing more veggie bowls. So I often will take ground beef. It's easy to keep in your freezer, defrost fairly quickly, and then I'll cook it up. I'll put rice on the bottom of the bowl. I'll have a lot of roasted vegetables on top of that, and then a little bit of the ground beef on top. Little drizzle of olive oil or vinegar and oil, and you have got yourself the most fabulous meal. If you want to get fancy, crumble a little feta cheese and maybe chop some parsley on top. Your stomach will thank you. And my friends at ButcherBox are making this really easy for you to do by offering my community $30 off of your first box. I'm just going to stop right there and tell you they're not doing that for anybody else. Go ahead and do an online search. You're going to realize they're so good to me. So you get $30 off of your first box. And then bonus, you get free choose your own protein in every box for up to a year. And so the choose your own protein, you get a choice of wild Alaskan salmon. Honestly, who doesn't love that? Lots of recipes on my blog if you want to see how I cook it. The grass-fed, grass-finished ground beef, or chicken breast, which I make a lot of chicken noodle soup in the winter, and then I just freeze it in single serving sizes. And it's just a great, super easy dinner that I just have to defrost. So go to butcherbox.com/Enos, use the code Enos, get this great deal. So hope you enjoy this special. And so when I was diagnosed, and kind of similar, I thought, wait a second, I've been in this health and wellness field for 30 years. I eat organic, I run half marathons, I do hot yoga. This is impossible. This isn't me. I remember saying that to God. And I get really mad at him.
Yeah.
And I kicked my kitchen counter a couple of times and left a couple of dents in it. But I will say we were going to be remodeling soon. So that's why I kicked my kitchen counter. I knew I was getting new cabinets, but I was really mad. I was really mad at him for probably a week. And I just thought, I'm not going to talk to you for a little while. I'm just mad. And that was the hardest week of having cancer, was doing it completely on my own. So I guess my question to you is, for you and your husband, Dominic, when all this, your plan, I say that with air quotes, when your
Yeah.
plan changed dramatically, did you get mad at God? Did you just say, this was not the way it was supposed to go? How did you handle that?
Yeah. Yeah. It was just like, how could you? I don't understand. I thought this was like, in my mind, the amazing testimony of how he got the glory was the home birth. It
Yeah.
was like, how could it not, like, how on earth could, like, it's so opposite. Like you said, I'm like, this is not me at all.
Yeah.
Like, literally everything I didn't want, that's what happened.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't like, this is on every level. This just sucks. Like, this totally just sucks.
And just tell the truth, right? This on every level,
Yeah.
this sucks.
It just sucks. And it was just so frustrating, and yeah, I just was like, why? Like, I just kept asking God, I'm like, why? Why did you let this happen? But then it was also like, well, was there some step along the way? Was there something I missed? Like, should I have done something different? Was there a red flag that I did that I missed that you were trying to tell me?
Yeah.
And so I was very, very frustrated, just more like just extremely disappointed, like just devastated. Like, this is not what I want. This is not how it was supposed to be, and really confused. I think that was like, I was really confused because it was just not what I knew was going to happen.
Right. Right.
I knew it was going to happen that way, and it didn't. And it was just, yeah, there was a lot of weeks. Like, I mean, the first week or two was like probably the hardest of, like, man, again, just like, what? It just made everything harder. It made everything harder.
It does.
Like, I'm like, really? I would have recovered in like 2 weeks if I would have, and I recovered really well, but it limited me. Like, I couldn't pick him up for a while. I couldn't, Dominic had to change his diaper forever.
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't lean over. I couldn't, like, getting in and out of bed was just
such a struggle.
I'm like, this shouldn't be a struggle.
Right.
I finally, after finally not being pregnant for all this time, with that being a struggle because of the weight, this was supposed to be my relief of, like, and no, just kept, I'm like, are you serious? And so I was very frustrated, very confused, very, like, trying to figure it out, and it was just really, and it was also traumatic because it happened very, like, we were like, the cliche that I didn't want is what happened. Like, we had to fly to the hospital literally 100 miles an hour. I was in so much pain. And then it was like a movie scene in a hospital. And I'm just like, and everything was so extreme. And it was traumatic for him and for me.
I'll bet.
And I was just like, wow, this is the polar opposite of the peaceful, beautiful, natural home birth that I wanted, And yeah, I was frustrated very much.
And so, like, when your mind is that jumbled up and you're so frustrated, what do you do to get out of it?
Just praying. I mean, there was talking. We would talk about it, like, try to talk it through, Dominic and I, because we just, like, when you can't figure something out, you have to just keep, like, talking it through, and then maybe you get the revelation, but it was mixed with praying too, and just remembering, like, and then reading the Bible, and, like, so I guess for me, seeing other people's stories in the Bible of, like a Job situation, not that it was that bad, but still, like, him and his friends were sitting around forever, like, what did you do wrong?
Right.
Like, why did this happen to you?
Yeah.
How could this, like, you must have done something wrong, because, and that was obviously different. That was Old Testament, but still they're sitting there, and that was like, everything was taken from him. What the heck just happened?
Right.
And so it was just kind of, I guess that was comforting for me, and knowing, like, okay. And also that this is just what happens sometimes in life.
It is just what happens. But I think our human mind, we need to know the why. Certainly that was the case for me. Did I not eat enough broccoli? Did I not do this? I'm sure you were thinking the same thing. And so I think just in our humanness, if we can assign a why, an answer to a why, all of a sudden it's like oh, well, there you go. Like we can just
Yeah.
let it go. But
Mm-hmm.
what do you do in that space when there is no answer to why? And you know that continuing to ask why is a deep, dark, ugly hole that you're not going to get out of. What do you do at
Mm-hmm.
that point?
It's a surrender, which I think that's the hardest thing for my personality. I just don't surrender things. I just don't. I'm like not even programmed that way,
Yeah.
And but that's like literally the whole like basis of our faith.
Yeah, it
so,
is.
so there's the struggle for me. And that is such a struggle, is like the surrendering of like, okay, I have no control. I have no idea why. Like literally a complete surrender.
Mm-hmm.
This is like the most opposite of my nature. I think of most human nature it is, but
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're a personality like me, I think everybody has different struggles in different areas, depending on their personalities. But for me, that was like an extreme, especially when you're like, I did everything right. I did everything like to make it
Right.
happen. I'm good at, and that's again with the controlling factor of
Yes,
trying
it's
to
that
control
that
everything. You
controlling
know?
factor. And I think nobody wants to have fault assigned to them. It's not my fault. I mean, that's how many times do you hear, people say that? It wasn't me, it's not my fault. And so if I
Mm-hmm.
know that, okay, I ate enough cruciferous vegetables and I exercised 5 days a week, it's not my fault. And I'm sure you were
Mm-hmm.
thinking the same thing. I did everything I could, but to get to that place of, okay, I did my part, God's doing his part, and at the end of the day things just happen, but they do happen for a reason, and we don't know what that reason
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah. No, he will always make purpose out of it, even if it's
Yeah.
something that God didn't cause, because God doesn't cause tragedy, or, that's not his nature, but he will redeem that.
Hmm.
That's the amazing part,
Yeah.
is, and like, wow, like, so no matter what happens, he will always work through that if we
Yeah.
give it to him, if we surrender it to him, and want
Yeah.
him in it.
Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
I talked about my story. I was asked to speak at a conference a few months ago, and one of the things that I really feel, that still small voice inside, that Holy Spirit throughout my cancer journey, was surrender with boldness. And I thought, with boldness. And I think about when I'm bold and I'm, going for this goal, or I'm all in when I'm bold. And so to
Mm.
surrender with boldness was like, I got to let this go. And I have to let this go boldly, assertively, almost aggressively, just like say, okay, I'm done. I can't do any more in my humanness, but it's time for God to step in and for me to allow him to step in. And that's given me great
Mm.
comfort.
Wow, that is really good. I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Not
that's good
easy.
for me too.
Okay,
Mm-mm.
good. Well, maybe it'll
No.
be good for some of the people who are listening too, to
Yeah,
just,
I'm sure.
because if we, that expression of white knuckling life, where I'm holding
Mm.
on so tightly to my relationships or my business, or,
Yes.
this happening or that happening. Boy, we just set ourselves up for a constant disappointment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so guilty of that. That's
Yeah.
a good white knuckling. I'm like, wow, yeah, that's me. That would be me.
Okay.
Literally me.
Well, Jen,
Yes.
I didn't know, but okay. We got a lot to
Yes.
talk
Yes.
about and unpack here.
Yes. I know.
Oh my goodness. You'd mentioned one more thing that I want to circle back to. You were saying during your pregnancy, you were feeling like, again, okay, is it supposed to be this uncomfortable? Okay, so I don't have legs and I don't, blah, 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 blah. So then you started talking to other women and found out, no, this is just what month 8 feels like, or whatever.
Yeah. Right.
But what you were saying, for me to unpack it, is you had community. So
Mm-hmm.
once you started talking to women who'd been through the same thing, all of a sudden it was like, okay, this is normal. And we can find real comfort in, kind of quote unquote feeling normal. And
Mm-hmm.
community really helps us with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
So,
yeah.
so
Oh yeah.
having that community around, how do you create community around things that you're maybe going through, or you move to a new town? I mean, you move back home, but so you probably still have
Mm-hmm.
friends and family, but you also lived in Europe
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah.
over a year. How do you create community and be around like-minded people who can really help you? I say this to our kids a lot. People either they're like elevators, they either take you up or they take you down. How do you find
Mm.
those people who take you up?
Yeah. Well, I think even in, here, yeah, moving back to my hometown, but it was still different, like
Hmm.
of no, my family's here, but then finding like our friends or community, and now we have a baby, and so that's a whole,
Hmm.
different kind. And then in Europe, it was very hard because it's very, very different in Europe,
Oh,
and
really?
people are, yeah. I mean, in Austria specifically, I'll just speak about there, but people just aren't as open. It's just very different,
Hmm.
And I'm not fluent in German, and nothing is accessible, so I had to rely on Dominic to help me with everything, which drove me crazy
I'll bet.
because I'm not used to that.
Hmm.
But we found community there through our church and here through a church.
Hmm.
So I mean, and that was the like-minded people. That's the people who will pray for you, who care about you, who will have fellowship with you,
Right.
regardless of, just kind of anything of what's going on in your life,
Hmm.
and be there with you. And we met up weekly in Austria. When we were in LA, we had people coming weekly to our apartment, and we would just pray for each other, worship, talk,
Hmm.
fellowship. That was aside from Sundays. And then same here. Same here where when we moved here, we got plugged into a church, and then it was just awesome. There was just like three or four different married couples, all within our age, and three of us were all pregnant
Oh
this year at the
gosh,
same
that's
time.
so great.
I mean, it just
What
so that
a
was a
huge
big
blessing.
blessing.
Yeah, huge
Mm-hmm.
blessing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because again, it
Mm-hmm.
just, as much as we, shouldn't categorize people and label them, there is something really comforting about being around like-minded souls who are, some of them are
Yes.
going through the same thing that you're going through right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It was just awesome, especially being a first time mom. And one of the other girls was also a first time mom. So
Wow.
that was really cool.
Yeah.
And now they're buddies. They oddly enough, she went even earlier than I did. She went like 4 or 5 days even earlier than me. So
Okay.
we both had first time moms.
Yeah.
She went 37 weeks exact, and I was almost 38 weeks.
Oh my
So,
gosh. Yeah. So
mhm. Same month.
your babies are growing up together.
Yes, they are. Yes.
So I want to just kind of wrap up with a couple of questions for you. And, you're a new mom, fairly newly married, but maybe 3 years,
For 4.5,
four and a
yeah.
half. Okay.
Hmm. Still fairly new, yeah.
Yeah, really new. So the world is a hard place to live these days. I
Hmm.
try really hard not to watch a lot of news.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you encourage yourself daily to stay upbeat and motivated and really be an encouragement to those around you? Because I think we all know that if we think too much and we go into some dark places, we're not going to be walking out the life that God has for us.
Right. Yeah. And that's been I would say in the last 3 years, that I've had all the range of emotions on that level because
Hmm.
I was paying too much attention to the news and then getting, just the whole emotional. I think everyone's kind of had their own roller coaster at some point,
Right.
but from 2020 to now. And I went from extreme frustration to, disbelief and disappointment and anger and the whole thing.
Hmm.
And then now I would say I'm definitely in a kind of settled, more level place when it comes to that. But how I keep myself, I mean, I would say it's really gotten like real recently. I think where the rubber meets the road because
Hmm.
of all these circumstances. And I think as much as I didn't, and most people didn't kind of want a lot of these outcomes, I see where God is doing, like working, and how it's producing like such a fruit, because things have gotten so more difficult in life for everybody lately.
Yeah.
It's certainly it's grown my faith much more. Like, and my husband's, I mean, he's a fairly new believer, but he's like that's a whole amazing testimony. That's a different story. He's far more advanced than even I am. And he's a pastor, and
Oh,
he's been
wow.
preaching. And so,
Wow.
yeah, it's
Okay.
kind of, it's a whole story. But, so honestly, it's not some like miraculous answer. It's just some days I'm really have to fight to be in a good mood. And some days I'm not, I'm just not. And
Yeah.
I struggle for my motivation, and I struggle to be the person that everybody thinks that I am, not to put on a mask.
Yeah.
It's who I am. That is, I'm very big on authenticity, and I don't fake anything. Who I am here is who I am on stage. And but I've had to fight for who I am, like to maintain, like, but this is who I've always been. Like,
Right.
I've always been this person. Like, I love this. And but sometimes that doesn't just come like always. I have to fight for that.
Right.
And that's really hard sometimes. And what I mean by fighting for it, how I do it is, again, being in the Word, because when I read in the Bible, it reminds me. Like, we need to be reminded all the time.
We do.
We think like, oh, the Israelites, how stupid can you be? You saw all these, miracles. You saw the Red Sea part,
Right.
and you still roamed around like an idiot for 40 years, People, you think these things, right?
Right.
But we are no different. They just forgot.
Right.
We just forget.
Right.
It's just our human nature, because we need to constantly we are reliant upon our Creator. And so we can't just do everything on our own.
Yeah.
And so I need that reminder all the time. Like I said, I hear the stories, and I remember, oh, I'm not alone. Oh, it was even worse for them. Oh, and then the fellowship, same thing.
Yeah.
You hear other people's stories, and you're like, oh, I'm not alone. Okay, this is a normal thing that people go through hard times.
Yeah.
And then it's connected with, okay, God created me for a purpose. Okay, that's right. And then you know what I mean? Don't cast all your burdens on Him. He gives us peace, not as the world gives, but He gives peace.
That's right.
Don't worry about tomorrow's problems. There's enough going on today.
There sure is enough going on today. Isn't that the truth? Yeah.
Those things, like, and then releasing it in prayer and giving it over to Him, or asking Him questions, or, like unloading it on Him, because He can take it. We can't.
Yeah.
So but it's every day, all the time.
Yeah.
That's how I'm getting through it. That's how I'm being strengthened. That's how I'm where I'm getting my peace from, and how I'm able to then like sustain, and like go on.
Right.
Basically with everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really good advice, because I think, again, we ask those questions why, or again, we watch too much news, or it's in our feed, social media, or, on your laptop. And then we just we spiral. I'm speaking about myself now.
Yeah.
I'll spiral into a dark hole where I think everything is bad. People are mean. People are horrible. Like, I could just go on and on. And I have to push the pause button. And I'm learning to do that. I'm not great at it yet, but my very first podcast guest, his name is Jamie Winship, and he is just this. I mean, I tell you, I learn so much from him every time. I'll tag him in the show notes. And he said, it's okay to just say to God, "Hey, God, I don't think you're big enough to fix this." And just tell the truth, because the truth will set you free. And I don't want to skirt around the truth anymore. Let's just speak the truth with boldness. I'll go back to that word, with boldness. And God's big, and I'm not God. I can't handle that, but He's big enough to handle it. And He said, so just speak truth to God, and just say, okay, I don't think you're big enough to fix my day, to heal my kid, to blah, 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 blah. And then just go silent, and He'll always answer you. And I love that. And I find myself doing that more and more each day. And he said, sometimes he does it like every half an hour because your day is just going so haywire. You need to just,
that's good.
Yeah, just kind of Just be truthful.
Yes, that's really good. Actually, that's something that it's just funny because it's something that recently I would say I always have been honest with him, I would say, but I never wanted to like, I guess, offend him in that way. But then it's
Right.
like God can handle it,
He sure can.
He's not like offended by your emotions.
He's really not, because he
You know?
made you exactly
Yes.
the way you are and
Yes.
exactly the way I am. And I am an emotional person, and my family sometimes even calls me dramatic, and that's okay. I'm just going to embrace it.
That's
Oh,
funny.
well, Jenn Bricker-Bauer, such a pleasure. Oh my gosh, after so many years not seeing you, it's beautiful to see your lovely face and to hear your story about your family and your new baby. And I'm just so happy you came on the podcast today. It was really encouraging. I just feel like you're just a walking encouragement to others.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me today on the Why Did I Get Cancer podcast. I've got my shopping guide for all of my cancer self-care items in the show notes, along with information about today's guest and our show sponsors. And don't forget to subscribe to my podcast so you never miss an episode. Keep in mind, I'm not a doctor. I'm just a gal that got diagnosed with cancer and wanted answers. If you need medical advice, please be sure to consult with a medical professional. And thank you for listening.